The galaxy had always been a vast, endless sea of stars, familiar to the Terran systems, their colonies thriving on the edges of known space. For centuries, humanity had stood as one of the most resilient forces in the universe, its reach expanding with every passing year. But nothing had prepared them for what came next. The Aegis, flagship of the Alliance of Terran Systems, was navigating the outer rim when the first signal of the Voidstorm reached them. The sudden jolt of energy against their hull was like the fist of an unseen god, slamming into them from the abyss. A shrill alarm echoed throughout the ship, followed by the voice of Lieutenant Juno Morel, who had been monitoring deep space scans. "Captain, you need to see this." Captain Cal Trask stood from his command chair and approached the screen, his eyes narrowing as he watched the readings flicker and pulse. The anomaly wasn't just a flare or some rogue gravitational disturbance. It was a force. It was expanding quickly. Within hours, it would engulf everything in its path. "Patch it through to Fleet Command," Cale ordered, his voice steady despite the growing sense of dread in his gut. The screen flickered, and the face of Admiral Breen appeared. His stern features were taut, eyes sharp with an unmistakable edge of concern. "Captain, what are we dealing with?" "We don't know, sir, but whatever it is, it's moving fast, and it's unlike anything we've ever encountered." Cale's gaze shifted to the swirling cloud of energy now visible on the screen. It was as if a piece of the void itself had been torn away and was now hurtling toward them, rippling through space with unnatural speed. "Prepare for a jump. We'll need to get closer to investigate," Cale said, already giving orders to his crew. The Aegis would make its way toward the anomaly, though every instinct told Cale that this wasn't a simple storm. The readings were unstable, suggesting that whatever this was, it defied the laws of known physics. As the ship moved closer, the atmosphere on the bridge grew tense. The crew was quiet, their eyes glued to the monitors, but as they approached, the full scale of the storm became apparent. It was no longer just an anomaly. It was a massive swirling vortex of energy, a blackened cloud that seemed to pulse and thrash with raw, primal power. It emitted strange electromagnetic waves, and from the core of the storm, the ship's instruments started to malfunction, throwing their navigation systems into disarray. "We're being pulled in," shouted Morel. She was fighting the controls, but the storm's pull was too strong. Cale's hands gripped the edge of his console. Full reverse, now, but it was too late. With a violent shudder, the Aegis was dragged into the heart of the storm. The ship trembled violently as the energy surged through the hull. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. It was as though time itself had folded in on them, and the ship was caught in an unending moment of turbulence. The storm's power wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, more insidious. The crew felt it in their bones, in the very air they breathed. It was as if the Voidstorm was alive, aware, watching them. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the storm released its grip. The ship was thrown out of the vortex and into the empty void, battered and disoriented. The crew gasped for air, their minds reeling from the unnatural experience. But Cale's instincts told him this was only the beginning. The storm had released them, but what had it left behind? "Status report," he demanded. Morel quickly began reviewing the damage. Hull integrity at 73%. Power fluctuations across the entire ship. Systems are slowly coming back online. "Get us out of here, now," Cale ordered. But even as they began their retreat, the reality of what they had just encountered began to settle in. The Voidstorm wasn't a random event. It was something more, something ancient, something deliberate. And as the crew of the Aegis navigated their way back to known space, the ominous thought hung in Cale's mind. What had just woken up in the farthest reaches of the galaxy? The Aegis limped through the void, its hull battered by the unnatural storm they had barely escaped. As the crew worked to repair the damage, Captain Cal Trask stood at the bridge, his mind racing. The storm had been no natural phenomenon. It had been far too precise, far too deliberate in its destruction. It had been an act of power, one that had reached across the galaxy with a force unlike anything humanity had encountered. "Captain," said Lieutenant Morrell, breaking his thoughts, "we've received a transmission from a colony on the edge of the Outer Rim. They're claiming to have survived the Voidstorm. It's impossible. According to the data, they should have been obliterated." Cale turned sharply, his attention snapped back to the present. "Patch it through." The screen flickered, and the face of Colony Administrator Dallows appeared, sweat beading on his forehead. His expression was a mix of fear and disbelief. "Captain Trask, you don't know what you're dealing with. The storm, it's not what you think. We've—" The transmission crackled, and for a moment, the words became unintelligible. But then, the administrator's voice cut through the static again. "It's Eclipse. The storm is part of something older. Something that came long before any of us." Before Cale could respond, the transmission was abruptly cut off. Silence fell across the bridge, and Morrell's eyes darted nervously to Cale. "Eclipse," she repeated. "What does that mean?" Cale's jaw tightened. He had no idea. The name sent a chill through him. Whatever it was, it seemed to have some connection to the storm. And now it appeared that someone had survived it and, more disturbingly, knew something about it. "We need to investigate," Cale said, already making calculations. "Set a course for that colony. If they've truly survived, they might have more answers than we do." As the Aegis set its course, the crew worked in tense silence. The journey would take them days, but the unease was palpable. The storm had been unlike anything Cale had ever experienced, and now an even deeper mystery loomed before them. What had the administrator meant by eclipse, and why had the storm spared that particular colony? Hours later, the Aegis arrived at the coordinates of the colony. The world, once bustling with life, now seemed eerily silent. A faint, unnatural glow flickered on the surface, as if the storm's energy was still pulsing through the atmosphere. "Scan for life signs," Cale ordered, "and prepare a landing team." As the ship descended into the atmosphere, the team was met with an unsettling sight. The colony's structures stood intact, but there were no signs of life, no movement, no activity. It was as if the storm had passed through and left everything frozen in time. Cale's gut twisted. This doesn't feel right. The landing party disembarked, carefully stepping out onto the barren ground. The air was thick, charged with an almost palpable energy, and the sky above was dark, swirling with unnatural clouds. It was as if the storm had left its mark on the very fabric of reality itself. They made their way to the central hub of the colony, where they found the main communications building still standing. Inside, the flickering screens revealed more of the chilling message. "The eclipse is coming. The storm is not the end, but the beginning. You must understand, before it's too late." "Administrator Dallows?" Cale called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. There was no response. Morrell approached a nearby terminal and began to decrypt the data on the screen. "Captain, this isn't just a warning. It's a record, a set of coordinates. It's leading us to something deeper within the system, something in the heart of the storm itself." Cale felt the weight of the moment press down on him. The storm was more than just a force of nature. It was part of something far greater, something hidden in the depths of space, waiting to be uncovered. "Prepare the ship," Cale said, his voice steady. "We're going after it." As they returned to the Aegis, Cale couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to cross a threshold from which there was no return. Whatever lay at the heart of the storm, it was clear now it wasn't just a cosmic phenomenon. It was a message, one that humanity had yet to fully understand. But they were getting closer. And as the Aegis powered up to leave, Cale knew one thing for certain. The storm was not finished with them yet. The Aegis sliced through the black void, its engines humming with the urgency of their mission. With each passing moment, Kale's sense of impending danger grew. The coordinates from the colony had led them deeper into the storm's heart, a place that had once been nothing but theoretical, a region where stars were distorted and reality itself bent under unseen forces. Yet, the closer they came, the more tangible the threat became. The storm, once a distant menace, now felt as if it were alive, aware, and watching. "Captain," Morale said from her station, her voice tinged with concern, "the storm's intensity is escalating. We're approaching the outer edges of the anomaly. The sensors are starting to break down. We won't be able to track any further." "Understood," Kale replied, his gaze fixed on the massive, swirling vortex in front of them. "We'll have to proceed without full data. Helm, prepare to enter the storm." As they neared the center, the very fabric of space seemed to warp. Gravity fluctuated, stars blinked in and out of existence, and strange electromagnetic pulses danced across their instruments. It was as if the storm existed outside the conventional laws of the universe, a place where physics had no dominion. Kale could feel the pull, a constant tug on the aegis, as if the storm were trying to swallow them whole. "Hold steady," Kale commanded, though his own heart was pounding in his chest. His crew was tense, but they had no choice but to follow the course. Without warning, the ship lurched violently and the lights flickered. The crew braced themselves as the Aegis was pulled into the storm. The viewport showed only a thick, suffocating blackness, the stars completely swallowed by the chaotic storm clouds. For a moment, it felt as if they had entered a different dimension entirely, where the very laws of reality no longer applied. "Shields holding at 45%, Morale reported, her hands flying across the console. "Engines are struggling to maintain course." "We're almost there," Kale muttered, his eyes fixed on the eerie, pulsating core that seemed to draw them in. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them, something ancient and far beyond their understanding. And then, as suddenly as they had entered, the storm's chaos ceased. The Aegis dropped into an unnatural calm. The void around them seemed to flatten, the crushing energy giving way to an eerie stillness. The core of the storm loomed ahead, a massive, dark mass that twisted in on itself. It was not a singular object, but rather a swirling mass of energy, a distortion in space itself. "Captain," Morale said, voice tinged with awe, "I'm detecting a structure inside the storm." Kale's pulse quickened. A structure? It was impossible. Nothing should have survived in the heart of the storm, let alone a building. But the readings were clear, there was something there. "Take us in," slowly, Kale ordered, his eyes never leaving the dark mass ahead. As the Aegis drew closer, the structure became clearer. It was a towering edifice, unlike anything Kale had ever seen, sleek, alien, and geometrically impossible. Its surfaces shimmered with an energy that seemed to pulse in time with the storm itself, as if it were breathing. The ship's sensors screamed warnings, but Kale ignored them. They had come this far. They had to know the truth. "Prepare a landing party," Kale said, his voice unwavering. "We're going inside." The landing bay doors opened, and the team, clad in advanced suits, stepped out onto the surface of the structure. The air was thick, and every step seemed to reverberate with a strange hum. As they made their way through the open archway, the wall seemed to shift and warp, as though the structure was alive and aware of their presence. "This is impossible," Lieutenant Judah Morale whispered, her voice echoing in the empty chamber. "There's no way this was built by any known species. It's ancient, far older than anything we've ever encountered." Kale didn't respond. His eyes scanned the walls, which were covered in intricate symbols that seemed to shift and rearrange as they moved closer. The air hummed with a strange resonance, as if the very structure itself was communicating, but in a language no human could understand. Suddenly, the chamber before them illuminated, revealing a massive, floating obelisk in the center. It was surrounded by an intricate network of energy conduits, each one pulsing with the storm's power. Kale could feel it now, A presence, not unlike the storm, but more focused, more purposeful. A voice echoed in their minds, deep and resonant, as though it came from the very core of the universe itself. You have come far, but what you seek will change the course of your people. Do you truly wish to know the truth? Cal's heart skipped a beat. The storm, the structure, and now this voice, it was all connected. And the truth it offered was something that could either save humanity or damn them all. The Aegis lingered on the edge of the Crucible's strange dimensional field, suspended in a state of uneasy calm. The storm's fury had subsided for the moment, but the storm's influence still hung thick in the air. The revelations of the Keeper, the ancient gods, the rift, and the storm were still fresh in Cal's mind, but they felt distant, like pieces of a puzzle that only had meaning once the whole picture was seen. They had been given a choice, a task, to either face the storm and uncover the power of the first cycle or to leave it alone, sealing away the knowledge and risk, ignoring the forces waking in the cosmos. The captain stood on the bridge, staring out at the swirling storm that was no longer just a natural phenomenon, but something far more sinister. A gateway, a wound in the fabric of reality itself, tethering them to an ancient, destructive power. Captain, Morel's voice interrupted his thoughts. We've made calculations based on the Keeper's coordinates. There's an object in the heart of the storm, something massive, something that might be a relic of the first cycle. But we don't have a lot of time. The storm's energy is building again. Cal turned, locking eyes with her. She was right. The storm was changing, becoming more aggressive by the minute. The energy field surrounding them pulsed in rhythm with the storm's core. The rift had been growing since they arrived, and the Keeper's words haunted Cal. The forces that once tore the universe apart are stirring once more. We'll have to move fast, Cal said, his voice steady despite the anxiety that churned in his chest. Set a course, full speed ahead. The Aegis surged forward, slicing through the swirling storm as the crew worked quickly to adjust their systems to the fluctuating energy fields. It felt as if the ship itself were being pulled in every direction, as if the storm wanted to consume them. But they pushed forward, driven by the promise of answers and the terrifying possibility that they might be the only ones who could prevent the storm from tearing the universe apart. As the Aegis neared the center, the shape of the massive structure became clearer. It was colossal, far larger than anything they had ever seen. It was not a ship or a station, but a living city of sorts, with vast spires reaching upward, connected by energy conduits that shimmered with strange, pulsating light. At its heart, an enormous, pulsating core glowed with the same unnatural light that had filled the Crucible. "This is it," Cal whispered under his breath. His pulse quickened as he saw it, the relic the Keeper had spoken of. The energy field surrounding it was thick with ancient power, and as they closed in, it felt as though the entire universe held its breath. Morel approached the navigation console, her fingers flying across the controls. "Captain, the storm is reaching critical mass. We're on the edge of a gravity well that's going to pull us in. If we don't land now, we won't be able to escape." Cal nodded grimly. "Prepare the landing team. We're going in." The Aegis slowly descended toward the surface of the massive structure. The ground below was not solid, at least not in any conventional sense. It was shifting, alive, as though the entire city was pulsing with energy. They touched down on a platform that was bathed in an eerie glow, and the ship's landing gear sunk into the strange surface with a soft hum. The team, heavily armored and prepared for anything, disembarked from the Aegis. Cal led the way, his gaze fixed on the swirling mass of energy ahead. The relic was calling to them, its power undeniable, its presence overwhelming. Morel approached Cal, her face serious. "Captain, whatever this is, it's not just a relic. It's a mechanism, a weapon, maybe, or a key, something far more dangerous than we first thought." "I know," Cal replied, his voice low. "But it's our only chance to understand what's truly happening here. We have to take the risk." As they moved forward, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate, and the air grew thick with static electricity. The sky overhead had become a swirling vortex, the very fabric of space distorting as if it were being torn apart. The relic ahead of them pulsed brighter with every passing second, as if feeding off the storm's energy. "This place," Lieutenant Juno said, her voice tight with awe, "it feels wrong. It's like it's not part of our reality." Cale didn't answer. He was too focused on the task ahead. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As they approached the heart of the structure, the massive core at its center seemed to beckon them, drawing them closer with its overwhelming gravitational pull. Morale took a deep breath. "What do you think this is, Captain? What's waiting for us inside?" Cale stared at the core, feeling the pull in his chest, the weight of the storm pressing in from every side. "The truth," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever it is, it's the key to understanding the storm and everything that's coming after it." As they reached the center of the structure, the core's light intensified, and Cale could feel the power flowing through him, through everything around him. The storm had led them here for a reason, but the reason was still hidden in the depths of the unknown. And as Cale's hand reached for the energy conduit that seemed to power the core, he knew that unlocking it would not just change their fate, it would change the fate of the entire universe. The Aegis lingered on the edge of the Crucible's strange dimensional field, suspended in a state of uneasy calm. The storm's fury had subsided for the moment, but the storm's influence still hung thick in the air. The revelations of the Keeper, the ancient gods, the rift, and the storm were still fresh in Cal's mind, but they felt distant, like pieces of a puzzle that only had meaning once the whole picture was seen. They had been given a choice, a task, to either face the storm and uncover the power of the first cycle or to leave it alone, sealing away the knowledge and risk, ignoring the forces waking in the cosmos. The captain stood on the bridge, staring out at the swirling storm that was no longer just a natural phenomenon, but something far more sinister. A gateway, a wound in the fabric of reality itself, tethering them to an ancient destructive power. "Captain," Morale's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We've made calculations based on the Keeper's coordinates. There's an object in the heart of the storm. Something massive, something that might be a relic of the first cycle. But we don't have a lot of time. The storm's energy is building again." Cale turned, locking eyes with her. She was right. The storm was changing, becoming more aggressive by the minute. The energy field surrounding them pulsed in rhythm with the storm's core. The rift had been growing since they arrived, and the Keeper's words haunted Cale. "The forces that once tore the universe apart are stirring once more." "We'll have to move fast," Cale said, his voice steady despite the anxiety that churned in his chest. "Set a course, full speed ahead." The Aegis surged forward, slicing through the swirling storm as the crew worked quickly to adjust their systems to the fluctuating energy fields. It felt as if the ship itself were being pulled in every direction, as if the storm wanted to consume them. But they pushed forward, driven by the promise of answers and the terrifying possibility that they might be the only ones who could prevent the storm from tearing the universe apart. As the Aegis neared the center, the shape of the massive structure became clearer. It was colossal, far larger than anything they had ever seen. It was not a ship or a station, but a living city of sorts, with vast spires reaching upward, connected by energy conduits that shimmered with strange, pulsating light. At its heart, an enormous, pulsating core glowed with the same unnatural light that had filled the Crucible. "This is it," Cale whispered under his breath. His pulse quickened as he saw it, the relic the Keeper had spoken of. The energy field surrounding it was thick with ancient power, and as they closed in, it felt as though the entire universe held its breath. Morale approached the navigation console, her fingers flying across the controls. "Captain, the storm is reaching critical mass. We're on the edge of a gravity well that's going to pull us in. If we don't land now, we won't be able to escape. Kale nodded grimly. Prepare the landing team. We're going in. The Aegis slowly descended toward the surface of the massive structure. The ground below was not solid, at least not in any conventional sense. It was shifting, alive, as though the entire city was pulsing with energy. They touched down on a platform that was bathed in an eerie glow, and the ship's landing gear sunk into the strange surface with a soft hum. The team, heavily armored and prepared for anything, disembarked from the Aegis. Kale led the way, his gaze fixed on the swirling mass of energy ahead. The relic was calling to them, its power undeniable, its presence overwhelming. Morel approached Kale, her face serious. Captain, whatever this is, it's not just a relic. It's a mechanism. A weapon, maybe, or a key, something far more dangerous than we first thought. I know, Kale replied, his voice low. But it's our only chance to understand what's truly happening here. We have to take the risk. As they moved forward, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate, and the air grew thick with static electricity. The sky overhead had become a swirling vortex, the very fabric of space distorting, as if it were being torn apart. The relic ahead of them pulsed brighter with every passing second, as if feeding off the storm's energy. This place, Lieutenant Juno said, her voice tight with awe. It feels wrong. It's like it's not part of our reality. Kale didn't answer. He was too focused on the task ahead. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As they approached the heart of the structure, the massive core at its center seemed to beckon them, drawing them closer with its overwhelming gravitational pull. Morel took a deep breath. What do you think this is, Captain? What's waiting for us inside? Kale stared at the core, feeling the pull in his chest, the weight of the storm pressing in from every side. The truth, he said, his voice steady. Whatever it is, it's the key to understanding the storm and everything that's coming after it. As they reached the center of the structure, the core's light intensified, and Kale could feel the power flowing through him, through everything around him. The storm had led them here for a reason, but the reason was still hidden in the depths of the unknown. And as Kale's hand reached for the energy conduit that seemed to power the core, he knew that unlocking it would not just change their fate, it would change the fate of the entire universe. As Kale's hand hovered just above the energy conduit, a strange, almost magnetic force pulsed from the core, drawing him closer. His heart raced, his every instinct screaming that this moment would define the future of humanity, and possibly the very fabric of existence itself. The air was thick with the hum of power, the relic's energy radiating outwards in waves that seemed to distort time and space itself. The storm outside intensified, a cacophony of howling winds and chaotic energy surging against the structure, as if the very universe was bracing for what was about to unfold. Captain, Morel called out, her voice tight with urgency, this thing, it's reacting to you. It's like it knows you're here. Kale barely registered her words as his fingers brushed against the conduit. The moment they made contact, a violent surge of energy coursed through him, and his vision exploded into brilliant, blinding light. He gasped, instinctively pulling his hand back, but it was too late. The energy had already invaded his senses, flooding his mind with images, sensations, and voices from across time and space. The storm outside seemed to dissolve into the ether as his mind spiraled through unknown realms. The Keeper's voice returned, echoing in the vast expanse of Kale's consciousness. You have touched the heart of the first cycle. The storm, the rift, the relic, they are all connected. You are now part of the fabric that holds the universe together or shatters it. The question remains, what will you choose? Kale's breath came in ragged gasps as the weight of the revelation crashed down on him. He was no longer just an observer, he was part of something far greater. The energy, the relic, it was alive, aware of him, and now, part of him. The storm was not merely an anomaly, but a nexus, a place of power where the boundaries between worlds had been breached long ago, and he had just awakened it. The images flooding his mind were impossible to comprehend. He saw civilizations rise and fall, entire galaxies torn asunder in a millisecond, the ancient gods themselves, colossal beings of incomprehensible power, clashing in cataclysmic battles. He saw the creation of the first cycle, the birth of the universe as it was known. The gods had shaped everything, but their pride had led to destruction, their wars fracturing the very core of existence. And now, the storm was the remnant of that broken cosmos, the last echo of their power. Through the chaos of visions, one constant remained, a single question, haunting and persistent. Will you be the one to restore what was lost, or will you destroy it all? Kale staggered, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the choice that lay before him. The storm was not merely a threat, it was a test, and he, humanity, was being asked to decide whether to rebuild the fractured universe or to let it slip into oblivion. His hand still tingled with the residue of the conduit's energy, and he could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "Captain," Morel's voice cut through the haze, her panic evident. "You're not responding. What's happening?" Kel's vision cleared, the images of the past fading into the distance. His body felt heavy, as though he were still tethered to the storm's vast energy. He looked at Morel, and for the first time, he saw the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty, the knowledge that their lives, and perhaps the future of the entire universe, now rested on his next actions. "I'm fine," Kale said, his voice hoarse, though the words felt hollow. "But it's true, Morel. This isn't just about the storm. It's about what's behind it. The gods left this relic, and it's more than just a weapon or a key. It's a choice." He turned to face the team, his mind racing. If the Keeper's words were to be believed, they had only two options: to harness the power of the first cycle, to restore the fractured universe and risk unleashing forces that could destroy everything, or to leave it all behind, potentially condemning the cosmos to an endless cycle of decay. "What we do here," Kale said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside him, "will determine the fate of everything. The storm, the relic, the gods, they've all led us here, and now we have to decide. Do we rebuild, or do we let the universe burn?" Before anyone could respond, the storm outside reached a new intensity. The energy surrounding the relic flared, and the ground beneath them trembled. The sky above seemed to crack open, revealing not just a storm, but a vast, swirling gateway, a rift in the very fabric of reality, showing glimpses of alien worlds, forgotten civilizations, and creatures that defied comprehension. "The rift is opening," the Keeper's voice echoed, now full of finality. "The gods' return is inevitable. The question is, will you stand against them, or will you stand with them?" The decision had to be made now. There was no more time to hesitate. Kale looked at his crew, their faces etched with the same uncertainty he felt. Morel's eyes were locked onto his, waiting for his command. In that moment, Kale understood that the storm was not just a force of nature, it was a test of will, a challenge to humanity's very survival, and the answer would come not from the relic or the storm, but from within them. Would they rise to the occasion, or would they succumb to the power of the gods? With a deep breath, Kale made his choice. "Prepare for the next phase," he said, his voice resolute. "We're going in." The moment Kale made his decision, the entire structure seemed to respond, the very air vibrating with the force of the choice that had just been made. The storm outside, once a chaotic maelstrom, now began to pulse in rhythm with the core, its winds and energy swirling like a living entity. The rift above them grew larger, revealing even more terrifying glimpses of alien worlds and ancient, unspeakable creatures that stared back at them with unfathomable intelligence. The crew gathered around Kale, their expressions a mix of determination and fear. They knew that their actions in the coming moments would define the future of the universe, for better or worse. The weight of the storm, The rift had become tangible, a pressing force that demanded a response. Humanity's role was no longer uncertain, it was pivotal, and Kale had just sealed their fate by choosing to face the storm head-on. "Captain," Morel said, her voice quiet but resolute, "the relic, it's still pulsing. It's alive, and it's calling us in. The storm is intensifying again. If we don't move fast, we won't be able to reach the heart of the rift." Kale nodded, locking eyes with her. "We've come this far. We'll make it to the core. Everyone, stay sharp. This is no longer just a mission. It's the fate of the universe." They moved quickly through the shifting landscape of the massive structure, the walls themselves alive with strange energies, crackling and shimmering with the force of the relic's power. The platform beneath them seemed to be constantly shifting, as if it were part of some vast machine that responded to their every movement. The storm outside raged with greater intensity, the wind howling as the rift widened, sending pulses of energy surging through the city-sized structure. As they neared the heart of the relic, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and Kale could feel the air grow thicker. The storm outside was no longer just an atmospheric disturbance. It was a rupture in reality itself, a tear that had already begun to bleed through dimensions. The relic, the heart of this ancient structure, was the key to either mending the rift or allowing it to consume everything. When they reached the central chamber, the core was even more overwhelming than they had imagined. It loomed over them, a vast, pulsing orb of energy surrounded by swirling conduits of light, each one feeding the power that emanated from the heart of the relic. The storm's pulse seemed to match the rhythm of the core, and Kale could feel his skin prickling with the intensity of it all. The entire room was alive, vibrating with cosmic energy, as though the very foundation of the universe was held within this one fragile moment. Morale glanced up at the core, her eyes wide with awe and fear. "This is it," she whispered. "We're standing at the edge of everything." The rest of the crew fell silent, their eyes fixed on the core. There was no going back. The storm outside, the rift in reality, it all led to this point. The relic held the answers to the questions they had sought, but it also held a dangerous power, one that could either save the universe or bring about its destruction. Kale took a deep breath. "The Keeper said the storm is a test. But I don't think it's just a test of us. It's a test of the universe itself. The gods left this relic for a reason. We're not just here to study it. We're here to decide the fate of everything." Morel nodded, her expression grim. "And the decision has to be made now." The core's light intensified, and the air around them became heavy with the weight of its power. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift, revealing strange symbols and ancient markings that glowed in time with the pulsating energy of the relic. The ground beneath their feet began to crack, as if the entire structure was waking up in response to their presence. Kale stepped forward, feeling an invisible pull toward the center of the core. It was as though the relic itself was drawing him in, offering him the answers they had all sought. But there was a catch, a price. He could feel it, a deep primal awareness that the storm, the relic, and the rift all shared a common thread: power. And with that power came the potential for unimaginable destruction. As Kale approached the core, the voice of the Keeper echoed once more in his mind. "The decision lies with you. The god's power is within your grasp. Will you choose creation or annihilation?" Kale's hand reached out, and for a brief moment he hesitated. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like 1,000 suns, the very essence of existence hanging in the balance. What was the right choice? Was the universe worth saving, or was it too broken to fix? But then he thought of humanity, of the countless lives, the potential of an entire species that had fought against impossible odds. He thought of the legacy they had built and the future they had yet to claim. "We will choose creation," Kale said, his voice firm, cutting through the tension. "We will rebuild." With those words, his hand touched the core, and the storm erupted around them. The relic flared with blinding light, and the very air seemed to warp as the power of the first cycle surged through Cal's veins. The universe itself trembled as the storm intensified, but now Cal could feel a new force, a force of healing, of restoration, coursing through him. The rift began to close. The energy of the storm stabilized, and the once chaotic winds began to calm. The power of the ancient relic, the god's last gift, had been unlocked, and in that moment, Cal knew that humanity's destiny was no longer uncertain. It had just begun. The blinding light from the core gradually subsided, leaving the chamber in a strange, almost sacred quiet. The storm outside, once a chaotic fury of destruction, had transformed into something altogether different. The violent winds had softened, the sky above now swirling with a calming energy, a faint glow emanating from the rift as it slowly began to close. The rift, the source of the storm's power, was healing, its chaotic energy stabilizing as though it had never existed in the first place. Cal stood before the core, his hand still resting on the pulsating energy conduit. The weight of the decision, the power that had surged through him, was fading, replaced by an overwhelming sense of clarity. The storm had not been a mere test of strength. It had been a test of resolve, of humanity's will to rise above destruction and choose a future forged in creation rather than annihilation. He turned to face Morel and the crew, who stood in stunned silence, their faces illuminated by the soft, ethereal light of the chamber. The storm outside had become nothing more than a whisper, a distant hum that seemed to echo the beating of the heart of the universe itself. "We did it," Morel whispered, her voice thick with awe. "We actually did it." Cal gave her a grim smile, but his thoughts were already moving forward. The relic had given them the power to heal the rift, but there was more to be done. The storm may have been quelled, but the universe was still fragile, still scared by the ancient battles of the gods. Their work had just begun. "The storm is just one piece of the puzzle," Cal said, his voice carrying the weight of the truth. "The gods are gone, but their legacy remains. The relic, the rift, it was a signal, a message that the balance of the universe has been disturbed. If we don't act, the cycle could begin again." His gaze shifted to the rift now closing in the sky above, the swirling mass of energy slowly folding in on itself. The threat was not entirely gone. The storm had been sealed, but the fabric of reality was still fragile. There were scars left by the gods' wars, wounds in the universe that still threatened to tear it apart. "We've unlocked the power of creation," Cal continued, "but it's up to us now to wield it wisely. We can rebuild, we can restore, but it won't be easy. We're not just facing the aftermath of an ancient war, we're facing the consequences of it." Morel nodded solemnly. "We have to make sure that what happened before, the mistakes the gods made, don't happen again." Cal's eyes flickered to the distant stars visible through the structure's walls. "We won't make the same mistakes. This time, we choose a new path. One where the storm doesn't destroy everything in its wake, but instead pushes us forward. Humanity's role is not to follow the gods, but to rise beyond them. We're the ones who get to decide what comes next." The crew stood together, each of them absorbing the gravity of Cal's words. The storm had been a catalyst, but it had also been a reminder of the potential of humanity. What had once seemed like an impossible test had now become the beginning of a new era, one where humanity would no longer be a bystander in the cosmic struggle, but a force of creation in its own right. "Let's go," Cal said, turning toward the exit. "There's much to be done. We have a universe to rebuild." The Aegis was waiting for them outside, the crew ready to embark on the next phase of their journey. As they made their way back to the ship, Cal's thoughts were already focused on the future. The storm had been the beginning, but now it was time to shape the future. They had the power, they had the knowledge, and with that, they had the responsibility to ensure that the cycle of destruction did not repeat. The Aegis lifted off from the platform, the crew now united with a shared purpose. Cal could feel the weight of the universe on his shoulders, But he no longer feared it. Humanity had faced the unknown, had chosen creation over destruction, and now they stood at the threshold of a new cycle. As the ship ascended through the clearing storm, Kale looked out at the stars. There was no end to the challenges ahead, but for the first time, humanity had the power to meet them. And with that power came hope, the hope that they would not merely survive in the aftermath of the gods' legacy, but thrive. The dawn of a new cycle had begun, and it was theirs to shape.